the super empath, the final wake-up call for the avoidant. There comes a moment when the person who loved the loudest finally goes quiet, and that silence is the avoidant's last warning. Because the super empath isn't here to chase, they're here to awaken. And once they wake up, the story changes forever. You can only run from someone who loves you for so long before you realize they aren't running with you. They're walking away. The super empath is not the clingy one. They're not the desperate one. They're not the one who needs saving. They are the one who gave you the version of love you didn't believe existed. The love that saw you, held you, accepted you, even when you hid behind distance, deflection, and emotional escape routes. But here's your final wake-up call. A super empath does not stay in relationships where their worth has to be guessed, tested, or taken for granted. They will love deeply, but they will leave decisively. They will give you patience, but they won't give you permission to keep disappearing. They will forgive your fear, but they will not sign up to be punished by it. And the moment they realize that their compassion has become your hiding place, not your motivation to grow, that is the moment everything shifts. Because the super empath's greatest power isn't their empathy. It's their clarity, their ability to walk away from anything that refuses to meet them with the same heart they give. And when they walk away, that's when the avoidant finally wakes up. Not because they've lost a person, but because they've lost the one connection that made them feel safe enough to love in the first place. The avoidant realizes too late that the distance they created was the space where the super empath built a life without them. This is the final wake-up call. You don't get to keep someone who was willing to stay if you made staying feel lonely. You don't get to keep the heart that fought for you if you kept fighting against it. You don't get to keep the empath who showed up every day when your absence was louder than your presence. A super empath won't punish you for your wounds, but they won't let your wounds become their prison either. And the day they stop explaining their needs, stop reopening the door, stop convincing you that they are worth showing up for, that is the day they step into the love they deserved all along. Not as a warning, not as revenge, but as evolution. And if the avoidant ever wants to be part of their story again, they'll have to do the one thing they always avoided: show up fully, clearly, consistently, or not at all. Because the super empath is done shrinking their love to fit someone's fear. They're done being the only adult in a relationship built on emotional hide and seek. This is your turning point. Either rise to meet the love you were given, or stand back and watch someone else step into the space you kept empty. The super empath isn't coming to rescue anymore. They've rescued themselves. A super empath's silence is often misunderstood. It isn't the silence of someone who has given up, nor is it the silence of someone who is playing games or seeking attention. It is a different kind of quiet. One that arrives after they have exhausted every pathway of communication, every attempt to understand, and every effort to bridge the emotional distance. This silence is the internal shift from trying to be heard to realizing they deserve to be understood without begging for it. When a super empath goes quiet, it means they finally see the difference between someone who genuinely can't connect and someone who simply won't. Their silence begins as reflection. They replay the moments they tried to express their needs with care, the conversations they approached with gentleness, the boundaries they attempted to set without accusation. They noticed the ways their emotional labor became invisible, how their empathy was accepted but rarely reciprocated. And slowly, they stop rationalizing the avoidance behavior as just their style. They begin to recognize the emotional imbalance, one person reaching, the other retreating. And they understand that no amount of patience can compensate for someone's unwillingness to meet them halfway. This silence is not passive. It's a powerful recalibration. It's the empath retracting their emotional energy from someone who continuously absorbs it without offering stability. It's the moment they stop interpreting their partner's distance as a challenge to overcome and instead see it as a pattern they are no longer willing to participate in. For the first time, they ask themselves not, how do I keep this connection alive? But why am I fighting for a connection that doesn't fight for me? This internal awakening shifts everything. The empath stops explaining things 5 different ways, hoping one will land. They stop overgiving in hopes of inspiring reciprocity. They stop making excuses for inconsistency, unpredictability, and emotional unavailability. The silence becomes their boundary, firm, calm, and unmoved by guilt. It is the moment where their self-worth speaks louder than their fear of letting go. What the avoidant often doesn't understand is that this silence is not anger. It is clarity. It's the moment the empath stops seeking closeness from someone who treats closeness like a threat. It's the moment they reclaim their emotional freedom. And once this shift happens, once they experience the peace that comes from no longer fighting for someone who resists being loved, the silence becomes not just a reaction, but a choice. Their quiet is their awakening. It is the beginning of the end of the cycle and the beginning of their return to themselves. A super empath loves with an intensity and depth that most people can only imagine. They bring not just attention and care, but presence, patience, and unwavering commitment to the people they allow into their hearts. They notice the small things, the subtle changes in tone, the hidden insecurities, the unspoken fears. They listen with the intent to understand, not to reply, and they give love not as a transaction, but as a gift freely offered. Yet this same intensity, this same willingness to open fully is not something they squander on someone who does not meet them with equal sincerity. Their love is deliberate and it is powerful, but it is not unlimited in the sense that it can survive being taken for granted over and over. A super empath will stay through moments of fear, distance, and avoidance, but only up to a point. They have a threshold, an internal measure of how much imbalance they can tolerate before it stops being a challenge and starts being a burden. They will give time to someone who is genuinely trying, even if imperfectly, but they will leave decisively the moment they realize their partner's absence of effort is not temporary. It's consistent. When they see patterns of withdrawal, excuses, and emotional unavailability repeated without real change, they recognize that continuing to invest will not create closeness. It will only reinforce a cycle of imbalance. Their decisiveness comes from a profound respect for themselves and for the integrity of their love. They understand that staying in a relationship where they carry the weight alone diminishes their energy, their clarity, and their ability to engage fully with life and with love. To continue loving someone who refuses to show up is not heroic, it is self-sabotage. The moment they reach that realization, their love does not diminish, but their tolerance for imbalance disappears. They step away, not in anger, but in recognition of what is sustainable and what is not. The super empath's departure is precise, measured, and intentional. It is not a dramatic exit to punish the avoidant. It is a natural consequence of their understanding of emotional truth. They leave decisively because they have given enough time, enough patience, and enough chances. Their decisiveness is a form of clarity. It communicates the value of reciprocity and the seriousness of true emotional connection. It forces the avoidant to confront the reality that love is not something that can be half given and still survive indefinitely. And it allows the empath to reclaim their energy, their peace, and their capacity for love with someone who will meet them halfway. The power in a super empath's love is not in endless pursuit. It is in the balance between depth of feeling and clarity of boundaries, between generosity and discernment. When they step away, it is not a retreat from love. It is a declaration that love must be mutual, or it is not sustainable at all. Avoidants lose the super empath not because they are unlovable, but because they consistently refuse to show up in the ways that matter most. The avoidance pattern of retreat, of emotional withdrawal, and of keeping intimacy at arm's length creates a slow erosion of connection that the empath cannot ignore forever. The super empath is attuned to the subtleties of love, to the signals that indicate presence, engagement, and willingness to meet halfway. They notice not only what is said, but what is left unsaid. They perceive when someone is physically there but emotionally absent, when words are offered without intent, and when gestures of care are hollow or perfunctory. Over time, the avoidant's inability or unwillingness to fully participate in the emotional exchange begins to weigh on the empath's heart, not in anger, but in sadness. They grieve the potential of the connection as much as the reality of it. The loss happens gradually, often unnoticed, until the empath reaches a tipping point. Every missed opportunity to connect, every boundary ignored, every subtle dismissal chips away at the sense of safety and trust that the super empath requires. They do not react impulsively, nor do they make threats. Their love is steady, patient, and resilient. But resilience has a limit, and patience is finite. They begin to realize that their efforts to nurture closeness are not being mirrored, that their presence and vulnerability are being absorbed without acknowledgement or reciprocation. This is not a failure of love. It is a mismatch of intention and capacity. The avoidant is capable of affection in their own way, but they are incapable of showing up consistently, fully, and courageously in the way the empath needs. The empath does not leave lightly, and they do not punish. They leave because they understand that love is a shared currency, and it cannot flourish when only one person is contributing. Their departure is a reflection of the truth. Connection cannot exist when one person hides behind distance and fear. The avoidant is confronted with the reality that the empath's commitment, patience, and insight are not guarantees. They are gifts offered to someone willing to meet them. When those gifts are disregarded, ignored, or undervalued, the empath must step away to preserve their own integrity and emotional well-being. In losing the super empath, the avoidant is forced to confront their own patterns. They face the emptiness created by absence, the quiet left in place of consistent presence, and the realization that love requires courage, effort, and vulnerability. The empath's leaving is not a punishment, it is an awakening, a mirror reflecting what the avoidant could not provide. It is a reminder that love cannot thrive in a vacuum, and that someone who shows up fully cannot be replaced by half measures or absence. The super empath's power is rooted not in endless giving or unconditional patience, but in clarity, the ability to see a situation, a relationship, and a person for exactly what they are without the distortion of hope or wishful thinking. They understand that empathy is a tool for understanding, not a shield to protect others from the consequences of their own behavior. This clarity allows them to navigate the complexities of love and connection without losing themselves in the process. They see the difference between someone who is genuinely capable of growth and intimacy and someone who simply hides behind fear, avoidance, or inconsistency. And when they recognize that the emotional imbalance is persistent and unchangeable, they do not flinch. They do not rationalize, negotiate, or hope for miracles. They act from a place of absolute understanding. They know that staying in a one-sided connection diminishes not only their energy, but the value of the love they are capable of giving. Clarity is what allows the super empath to detach without detachment from their own heart. They love fully, intensely, and without reservation, yet they can observe the relationship objectively. They can identify patterns of withdrawal, inconsistency, or emotional unavailability without interpreting those patterns as reflections of their own worth. This clarity is a form of self-preservation. It ensures that their empathy does not become a trap and that their heart does not become a hostage to someone else's inability to meet them halfway. They understand that love is not measured by endurance alone, and that the longevity of a relationship is irrelevant if the connection is fundamentally unbalanced. Because they operate from clarity, a super empath sets boundaries that are precise, non-negotiable, and rooted in truth. They communicate their needs openly and consistently, without guilt or apology. When those needs are ignored or dismissed repeatedly, they do not interpret the lack of response as a temporary lapse. They recognize it as a reflection of a person's capacity and willingness. Their decisions are deliberate. Staying where their love is undervalued is no longer an option, and leaving where respect and reciprocity are absent is inevitable. This decisiveness is not cold. It is informed, intentional, and deeply humane. It is the understanding that true connection can only exist between equals, and that compromise must never come at the cost of self-respect or emotional health. Clarity allows the super empath to remain grounded, even in the turbulence of emotional intimacy. They see fear for what it is, avoidance for what it is, and inconsistency for what it is, without projecting blame or shame. This perspective creates space for growth, either for themselves or for the other person, but it also provides the strength to walk away when growth does not occur. Their love is intentional, and their departure is intentional too, rooted not in emotion alone, but in unwavering awareness of the truth. They do not linger in confusion or uncertainty because they have learned that love without clarity is simply hope dressed as devotion. The final wake-up call from a super empath is not gentle and it is not negotiable. It is a demand for growth, for presence, for courage, the essential qualities required to sustain a meaningful connection. The super empath does not issue ultimatums lightly, and they do not leave openings for repeated patterns to continue unchecked. They have spent countless hours giving patience, energy, and emotional labor to someone who may not have been ready to meet them, yet their capacity for endurance is not infinite. They love deeply, but they do so with intention, and their intention is clear. They will not remain in a relationship where their love is undervalued or where they are consistently forced to shrink themselves to accommodate someone else's fear or avoidance. This wake-up call challenges the avoidant in ways that cannot be ignored. It forces them to confront the reality that love requires participation, vulnerability, and consistency. It is no longer enough to show up sporadically, to retreat when intimacy becomes uncomfortable, or to offer half-hearted gestures while withholding true engagement. The super empath's presence illuminates the gaps in effort, commitment, and emotional availability, and their withdrawal casts those gaps into sharp relief. The avoidant is faced with the undeniable truth: connection is not sustained by avoidance, and love cannot survive in the shadows of fear. To remain in the empath's life, they must grow, they must stretch, and they must confront the very patterns that have kept them at a distance. The demand for growth is not rooted in punishment. It is rooted in respect for the empath's heart and for the integrity of the relationship. The super empath understands that real intimacy requires both people to show up fully, consistently, and without reservation. They recognize that staying in a dynamic where only one person invests creates imbalance, resentment, and eventual emotional exhaustion. Their final wake-up call is a mirror held up to the avoidant, reflecting not judgment but reality. If you cannot rise to meet this level of love, you cannot remain part of it. Growth in this context is multidimensional. It is about courage, the willingness to face vulnerability rather than hide behind detachment. It is about consistency, the willingness to engage emotionally, to follow through, and to be reliable. It is about self-awareness, the willingness to recognize patterns of avoidance and actively work to change them. The super empath demands all of this, not because they seek control, but because they understand that true love thrives only when both people contribute fully. There is no compromise in emotional truth, no tolerance for half measures, and no space for excuses that allow fear to masquerade as affection. The wake-up call is final, firm, and transformative, offering a choice: rise to meet love in its fullest expression, or step aside and witness someone else receive the connection you could not sustain. The super empath does not leave lightly, and they do not issue warnings in vain. Every moment of patience, every ounce of love, every step toward understanding has been given with intention. Their silence, their decisiveness, their unwavering clarity, it all speaks a single truth: love is sacred, and it deserves to be met with courage, presence, and reciprocity. This final wake-up call is not a threat, it is an invitation, an opportunity for growth, transformation, and awakening. To those willing to rise, to show up fully and consistently, it is a chance to rewrite the story. To those unwilling, it is a lesson that love cannot be carried alone, and that the heart that gives so freely will ultimately find its own path to fulfillment. So honor the super empath, not with fear, not with games, but with truth, presence, and respect. Recognize the value of those who love with depth, who see with clarity, and who hold space for the courage it takes to truly connect. Because when the super empath steps into their power, they step into the love they were always meant to receive. and they leave behind only what no longer serves their growth, their joy, or their heart. Thank you all for being here today, for opening your hearts, and for listening with the same courage and intention that the Super Empath inspires. It is not easy to confront truth, to face patterns, or to challenge ourselves, but your presence here shows a willingness to grow, to understand, and to love with clarity. I am deeply grateful for your attention, your energy, and your openness. May you carry this message forward into your relationships, your choices, and your life. Honor the love you give and the love you receive. Walk with courage, show up fully, and remember, the most powerful connections are those where hearts meet with honesty, respect, and reciprocity. Thank you, and take care.